Hello, welcome back to ICR Wrong Reads, and today I'm going to be ranking every classic book on my shelf. So I was organising my books for moving out, which I'm doing in a couple of weeks' time, and I decided that I was going to rank every book on my classic shelf. So I normally change my books into Doctor Who, non-fiction, classics, series and standalones. And so that's why I decided to do classics for first. If you're interested, I could do the rest of them. But for now, I'm going to start with my classics. So I've got my cup of tea, which is a lovely Earl Grey latte, and I am going to get started now. So let's jump onto the tier maker and we can have a look. So first of all, let's go over our tier ranking. So at the very bottom, we've got It Was Comforting to Know I Could Fall No Further, and that is from The Bell Jar by Sylvia Plath. And then we've got Despair Has Its Own Calms, and that is from Dracula. Then we've got Half Agony, Half Hope, which is from Persuasion by Jane Austen. And then Only Connected, the Prose and the Passion, and Both Will Be Exalted, which is from Howard's End. And then last but not least, we've got Never Have There Been Two Hearts So Open, No Tastes So Similar, and that is also from Persuasion. So let's just jump into it and we'll just take it as it comes, shall we? Right, first up we've got The Prince by Niccolò Machiavelli. Oh gosh, I couldn't say that there. I'm not going to lie, I didn't particularly enjoy this one. I thought it was very weird. It was definitely more pointed. So instead of this being, oh, this is a general thing to do, it was more, this arsehole here and this arsehole here was rude to me once, so I'm going to drag them in form of a book. That is essentially all this was. But it was quite fun to see centuries old drama be hashed out in a classic novel. Then we've got A Portrait of a Lady by Henry James. I really dislike Henry James's work. I've never come across anything that I've actually remotely liked by him. The Portrait of the Lady was by far the worst though for me. I just didn't enjoy it whatsoever. The Black Spider by Jeremiah Gothis, I believe is how you pronounce it. And I came across this when I was looking for gothic novels to read at some point. And I really found there was lots of variation on that. This one was sort of a small horror tale about a small village in Germany who became overrun with black spiders, and it was spooky but in a very stilted way. So that's why I decided to go in the middle category, because it wasn't brilliant but it wasn't awful. Nice in the middle. The Five Children in It. Again, it's going in the middle category because it was just there. It's a kids' book, and it's a famous kids' book, The Five Children in It, and it's good for them. For me personally, not really a fan. Well, I can't even say I'm not really a fan. It was that kind of era of children's novels that I read, because it was kind of Enid Blyton, that sort of era, which came with Ian Nesbit, and the language is very reminiscent of reading children's books from that kind of time, and I enjoyed it because of that. If I had grown up with it, I probably would have enjoyed it a lot more, but I didn't. Mrs. Zan and Ghost. Oh, this is going to be the start of my absolute adoration of Wilkie Collins throughout this video, so I do apologise. But Wilkie Collins was a writer who was around the same time as Charles Dickens. They were very close friends, and he wrote quite a lot of sensationalist novels, and he wrote a lot of ghost story novels as well. All of his stories have an underlying political theme going throughout it, and this is no different. This is about the pressurisation of women to remarry after they've lost someone in society, so that they're not allowed to kind of mourn and grieve, even if because they're young, you know. And it has that supernatural element to it, which quite a lot of Wilkie Collins stories don't actually have. But this is really fun, and it was read. I listened to it on audiobook, and I believe it was read by Gillian Anderson, which was very pleasant. Sorry guys, Frankenstein is going straight into Despair Has Its Own Calms, because I can see how it was a very good book. You know, I can see how it was a celebrated classic. Mary Shelley did amazing work with it. It was very, very good. And by all means, I should have enjoyed it. It should have been something that was straight up my street. But I didn't. It was just, I didn't enjoy the writing. I didn't enjoy the way it was planned out. I wasn't a fan of the characters and pretty much anything. And I just wasn't enjoying it while I was reading it. And I tried 2 different ways. I tried reading it by hand and I've tried listening to the audiobook, because I know sometimes with Regency work it's better to listen to it than read it. But either way, I just wasn't a fan of it. The Curious Case of Benjamin Button by A. Scott Fitzgerald. Now, this is one of these stories that I actually didn't know it was by A. Scott Fitzgerald, and I just came across it one day in the library and I thought, why not? Let's give this a try. I know the story and I know the author, so let's see what happens. I enjoyed it a lot more than I was expecting it to. I only read one other book by F. Scott Fitzgerald, and I found that kind of middling as well. The concepts were good. I enjoyed the writing a lot more. It kind of devolved into that kind of insanity, and it's definitely more of a short story and that sort of thing. So you could appreciate it for what it was, and I like how they managed to flesh it out and kind of build upon it in different adaptations and movies and stuff. Testament of Youth by Vera Brittain. So I read this book by after the film came out, The Testament of Youth, and I decided to read it to see what it was like. It's a very, very thick book, and I believe it was probably one of the best things that I chose to do coming out of that, because it's a very, very harrowing book to get through, but it's well worth it. It really shows what especially like a middle upper class girl went through during the First World War when she was trying to get an education at Oxford, but also losing all of her friends and her brother at the same time. And it's harrowing, but it's worth the read, I think, especially right now, when war is one of these things that's quite often talked about in the news and stuff. Just knowing the horrors of it is important to kind of talk about and read about and stuff. Whispers in the Darkness by H.P. Lovecraft. Ooh, I feel like there could be doing with one about here. I feel like I'm putting everything in the middle category, because that's I'm going to put it in here anyway. So I've got a friend that's a big fan of H.P. Lovecraft, and because of that I have read quite a lot of his work actually, because I kind of pick at it and choose at it. Every so often there's a story there that absolutely just throws out at you and gets me. But unfortunately, Whispers in Darkness, is that what it's called? Whispers from Darkness, or whatever it is, wasn't one of those for me. It was a really, really good story, and I think it's very indicative of kind of Lovecraft's writing and style and racism. But it's a good story, fun, and I think it also suffers from me personally because I'm not a big fan of short stories. So I kind of wanted it to be more fleshed out and more kind of in depth. But I feel like that would also ruin the tension and the terror that comes from it. Mikhail Bulgakov, The White Guard. Here's another one that I'm putting in the middle here. Oh well. So The White Guard, I had only read Master and the Margarita by Bulgakov before, and I decided to pick this up because it was about a Ukrainian family on the edge of the 1918 revolution. And it was just essentially about this woman, her husband, and his brother and sister, I think. And it was essentially just their lives. It was quite boring until all of a sudden it wasn't quite boring. And then it kind of lulled again, and then it went back up and it went back up. But it also gave the opportunity to compare what a Russian family was doing versus a Ukrainian family, which was, I read this last year, so it was also quite a stark cultural difference, which I think Bulgakov highlighted quite well. Rebecca by Daphne du Maurier. Ooh, it's going at the top. I love Gothic literature, and I love kind of that dodgy characters and kind of the tension and the creeping of it. And I think Rebecca does this absolutely remarkably well. It's really well paced. It kept me on the edge of my seat. I think I read this within 1 or 2 days. I was just so hooked on it, and I kept wanting to find out, and I thoroughly enjoyed it, and that's why it's going in the top tier. The Invisible Man by H.G. Wells. I think The Invisible Man is probably my favourite of all of H.G. Wells' work. It wasn't my favourite premise when I was going through all of his work. It's just the absolute terror of which he can conjure up from the crimes and the doings of this man, and what he's doing when he's invisible is just absolutely terrifying. And I think H.G. Wells really works that so well and does absolutely remarkable when he's doing that sort of work. The Art of War. So this is kind of like The Prince, whereas it's sort of not really... It's a very, very old book, right? So a lot of it isn't exactly war advice. It's essentially, feed your soldiers. They'll do better. If you pay them, they won't abandon you. Don't try and trick people if you don't know what you're doing. That sort of things. It's pretty much straightforward advice. But I was actually talking to a friend about this, and they're like, yeah, but they probably wouldn't have paid a lot of soldiers. And I was like, yes, I didn't think about that. You just take so much for granted now. It's kind of... a lot of it feels like common sense, but even still, pay your soldiers and they'll probably not abandon you. That sort of thing. But it is what it is. Death on the Nile by Agatha Christie. Ooh, up the top. I love Agatha Christie. I've only actually put one of her books in here, because if I listed pretty much all of Christie's work in here, it would just be all her at this point. I did my dissertation on Christie's Poirot, and I did it on Father Brown, and I did it on Sherlock Holmes, and that was my advanced English dissertation. And I just have such a place in my heart for Poirot, and that's why I chose this one, which is Death in the Nile, which is the most recent one I've read, which I read just before the film came out. I've been meaning to read them in order, the order that they were published in, but I haven't gotten around to it yet. But it's a very good book, and it really plays in your expectation a lot more than I was expecting it to, because obviously Agatha Christie is one of those writers that you can never expect the unexpected almost. Like, she'll always pull around on you and trick you, or and go, I wasn't thinking about that sort of thing. But this one does that triply in a way, like goes like that and that, and you're never quite sure where you stand with it, which is why I think it works so well, particularly in this kind of high stakes situation, along with money and stuff like that. Oscar Wilde's The Canterville Ghost. Ooh, I quite like this. This is a short story collection by Oscar Wilde, which is essentially just a bunch of ghost stories, where the Canterville Ghost is the main story. And it's different in a way because it's not it's a comedy more than it actually is a horror or anything like that. So you've got this ghost that lives in Canterville House that's trying to scare the children of the new owners, but the children just find this ghost so funny and just absolutely crack themselves up laughing with this ghost, and they end up becoming friends, and that's what kind of the comedy's about. I enjoyed this, but again, I found it far shorter than I had. One page they were trying to scare, one page they were dead friendly. It was just very, very rushed, I felt, but you could definitely see Oscar Wilde's humour coming through in it, and I really enjoyed that about it. I Capture the Castle by Dodie Smith. Again, I'm putting everything in the middle. It looks like a Gaussian distribution curve. Oh god, I've been thinking about too much about maths. Anyway, I Capture the Castle by Dodie Smith is one of these books that I think I would have got more out of it if I read it earlier. So I've had this on my shelf for years, my TBR for years and years. I bought it when I was about 13, 14, which I think would have been the prime time to actually read it. But I didn't read it. I kept it on my shelf and I didn't do anything with it until about 2 years ago. And then I read it and I fear it was too late. It's very much a coming of age, like a teenager, early teenage years novel rather than anything else. So that's probably the reason I didn't like it as much. Little Women by Louisa May Alcott. I like Little Women. There's not really much to say about it. It's a fair long book. It makes you cry, it makes you laugh, and it leaves you depressed after you finish watching every single adaptation of it. A Christmas Carol by Charles Dickens. I'm putting this in the middle, but it's reasonable to put it in the middle because I absolutely love this story. I just hate the writing. So I am not a fan of Charles Dickens at all. I do not like his writing style. I do not like the way he approaches stories, but A Christmas Carol is one of my favourite stories. It's so good. You've got that kind of sticking it to the rich people, repentance. You've got all of it, that kind of atmosphere of Christmas in the Victorian age. Everyone's wearing crinolines and it's brilliant. And the Muppets Christmas Carol, absolutely great. But I just simply do not like the writing. And that kind of, when you're trying to read a story, that really brings a lot of it down. So yeah, that's why it's in the middle there. But hey ho. Next up, we've got The Woman in White by Wilkie Collins. Straight to the top. This was the very first Wilkie Collins book I ever read. It's about 600 pages long and I read it in 3 days. I was so obsessed with it, and it was like the only thing I could think of about her for like months after it. It's gothic, it's sensational, it's crime, it's got female characters that are properly written. It's absolutely divine. It's, if anybody hasn't read this book and you like crime books, or you like gothic books, or you like just read it, right? Romances, read it. It's just one of those books that kind of hit every stop for me. It's brilliant. Highly recommend this one. Fellowship of the Ring by J.R.R. Tolkien. Ooh. I'm going to put it in here. And quite a lot of people I know actually don't like this book, that it's quite drawn out, there's quite a lot of walking scenes, it's a bit boring, and I can agree with all of that, but for some reason it sort of worked with me. I think it's the same reason why I liked Middlemarch, which I'm going to talk about later, is that it just kind of hit the right notes with me and it kind of worked, and I really kind of enjoyed those slow paced scenes where they're just kind of walking and talking, because it actually made you feel like they were on an actual thing. Because when we were walking the West Highland Way, a lot of the time we were just sitting talking absolute nonsense, which I feel like the Hobbits do quite a lot in the first half of this novel. They just kind of walk and talk and nonsense, and that's just kind of what we did. So it's that nice thing to talk about. Northanger Abbey by Jane Austen. Now, Northanger Abbey isn't my favourite Jane Austen by far, but it is a very, very good one. I think probably definitely deserves to be in the top tier. I've read it quite a few times. The first couple of times I had read it, I hadn't read any of the kind of gothic novels where it was kind of taking the piss, because that's what it is. It's a satire novel of gothic novels of the day. So when I read it, I didn't really... So I thought that this was quite quirky, almost, for Austen. But then I read quite a lot of gothic novels, particularly Anne Radcliffe and kind of The Black Spider, those kind of ones, and I realised what exactly it was taking the piss out of. And it's just done so well, it's written well, and the way that they just completely takes the piss out of it, absolutely done perfectly to a T. And I think that's why it is such a good kind of bouncing off point, and why it's so funny. It's so funny, and I don't think people sometimes appreciate that very much, how funny Jane Austen can be. But it is one of our funniest novels, probably up there with Emma. Okay. Next up we have Carmilla by Sheridan Le Fou, I believe. Yes, it is. And I am putting it here because I love vampire stories, and I love this story because it's got... Oh, maybe I should put it... Okay. I'm putting it on the top tier. I'm putting it on the top tier because it is just so good. There is a couple of gripes I have about it, particularly the length. I would much have liked it to be a little bit longer. It's a novella more than anything else. But definitely it's such a good story. The relationship between the two main characters, the vampire and the girl, it's just so well done, and there's probably quite a lot of politics behind it that are like, oh, women's sexuality and stuff. Nah, I just take it at face value. It's two women, one vampire, one's not. Just take it at face value. Sometimes you need to do that. It's fun. Next up, we've got The Master and the Margarita by Michael Bulgakov. Gosh, his name's getting to me. I really enjoyed this one. It was quite difficult to read. I struggled with it quite a bit. But kind of once I got into the flow of it, I normally read books quite quickly. Whereas with this one, I had to slow down and kind of take my time with it, which was worth it. Because it was a very, very fun novel and very, very wacky and out there and that kind of thing. But it was kind of like nothing I've ever read before. And it's that reason why I kind of appreciate why people say it's one of those novels that you have to read, because you have to read it to understand how crazy it is. And yeah, I thoroughly enjoyed the experience, even though it took me a lot longer than I was expecting. Next up, we have Wuthering Heights by Emily Bronte. Now, controversially, Emily Bronte is the only Bronte sister I don't like. Wuthering Heights, I did not enjoy. And I didn't enjoy the story, I didn't enjoy the writing, but I also didn't enjoy the fact that people call it a romance. Because what the fuck is wrong with you if you think this book is a romance? It's not romance. That's insane. Ugh. Anyway, it's not a romance. And yes, please don't call this a romance. If you think that that's romantic, then please look after yourself, because I don't think that's romantic. Yeah, I just don't particularly like anything about it. Oscar Wilde, The Picture of Dorian Gray. Woo woo! This was a good book. I really like Oscar Wilde's writing. I think I'm going to dig around a bit and find a book that I click more with, because I really do like The Picture of Dorian Gray, but also I don't really like it. I think that's why it's in the middle, because it's one of these books that I'm just like, I still don't know if I entirely enjoy it or not. Because I like the idea of a man with a portrait in the attic, but then this guy just goes absolutely off the rails. So I know that's the point of the book, but I don't know. I both like it and dislike it at the same time, and I think I'm just going to accept that and move on. Charlotte Bronte with Jane Eyre. And Jane Eyre, same reason. You can probably guess why all of these books are at the top. They're very gothic, they're very heavy, and they're very dramatic. And Jane Eyre's no difference. Beautiful. Don Quixote. That's Going into Despair has its own cams, because it's long. And I wanted to finish it long before I managed to finish it. Because the first book was good. I enjoyed the first book. It was funny. I definitely find where people found it funny, where this old guy's just going around in centuries old armour shouting at windmills. It's funny. The second book is unhinged. I don't know what's going on there. It's nuts. Yeah. That's my opinion on Don Quixote. Then I've got Dr. Jekyll and Mr Hyde by Robert Louis Stevenson. Oh, this is a hard one. Should it go in the top or this one? I'll put it in this one, with a caveat that it's probably more halfway about here than anything else. So, I really like this book. I don't like how a lot of adaptions try and add in a weird romance. I like the relationship that Jekyll has with his solicitor. And I feel like that's like kind of very important to the book, that's kind of missed in every adaptation. But it's a good book, and it's really quite short, and it's fun. It's very gothic as well, like a good gothic book. The Dream Woman by Wilkie Collins. This also goes to the very top for this one. I think this is probably a lesser known book. So basically, this is a novella about a man who has a dream that he's going to get killed by this woman, and he becomes paranoid about it, and he becomes so paranoid about it that he loses his life and becomes unravelled, and it ends up happening anyway, and it's kind of like that self-fulfilling prophecy thing he was talking about, and it's so well done, and it's really, really short, and it's fun. Lady Chatterley's Lover by D.H. Lawrence. I hate this book. I think it's ridiculous. It is... I understand it was banned, and I understand it was very important to get it unbanned and all that sort of thing. I just really didn't like it. The main character is snobby and stuck up, and I hate everyone involved. Time to move on. Emma by Jane Austen. Top again. Emma's just such a funny Austen book. It's a pure comedy. It's just, you've got this main character who is like so entitled and so up it, and it's essentially just her coming to terms with it, and I think it's the comedy which makes this such a good Austen book for me. Rats in the Walls by H.P. Lovecraft. Now, this is kind of the same for me as Whispers in the Darkness, so I'm not going to say too much about it, other than it's kind of middling, and I feel like Whispers in the Darkness is scarier, but Rats in the Walls is more realistic, which I think maybe makes that scarier in a way. I don't like rats. Persuasion by Jane Austen. This is my favourite Austen book of all time. Persuasion is just such a beautiful written novel. You've got that yearning and the longing and the perfectness and the quietness of it all and the maturity, and it's just beautifully written, beautifully done. I've read it about 1,000,000 times. We're not going to talk about the 2022 adaptation of it because that does not exist in my eyes, and all happy. Middlemarch by George Eliot. I am putting this up here, and I fully ordered this book as part of a 10 books for £30 kind of set, and I got this one and I was like, this sounds kind of boring. It's about a town before the introduction of a bill. For some reason, it was the most compelling thing I've ever read. It's so boring. It's literally just about the lives of these people in this town, and like their friendships with each other, and the drama, and it's so boring, but it's so compelling. George Eliot writes in such a fascinating way. You kind of hang off every bit of her words and her description and everything, and it's just, I ended up falling in love with almost all of the characters, even if they were kind of arseholes, because George Eliot does a really good job of kind of displaying them being multifaceted and have different sides to them, which is just wonderful in that kind of classic novel. Edgar Allan Poe's Tales of Horror. I don't really particularly have a big fan of Poe's writing. There's quite a lot of short stories that he does that are quite good, but quite a lot that are not very good, and they're short stories, which always I struggle with. We've got H.G. Wells' The Time Machine. This is also another favourite of mine in terms of H.G. Wells. I love time travel, as can be told from literally any other video on my channel. It's got a weird political parabola about people who live underground, people who live overground, and that sort of thing. But it really delves into that horror that I think H.G. Wells skirts quite a lot of that time. He's quite known for being a sci-fi writer, but I would feel like he's much better at writing horror, and it's kind of like that horror within the sci-fi genre that he works so well at, which is why I think he's really, really good with these kind of books. Dubliners by James Joyce. I don't remember this one very well. James Joyce. It was short stories, and they were all kind of loosely connected. To the Lighthouse by Virginia Woolf. I've realised that after reading this, I am not a fan of abstract literature. I tried again with Virginia Woolf, and I got on slightly better, but this was the first one I read by her. It's very, very abstract. It's supposed to take place on a Scottish island. It doesn't... I had no idea it took place into a Scottish island because there's literally no indication it was in Scotland until like the end, and I was like, wait, this is supposed to be in Scotland? All of these people are so English. But it's so abstract and like thingy, which I don't really... I don't really get, and I can't appreciate in the same way a lot of people can, which is why it wasn't for me. The Frozen Deep by Wilkie Collins. The Frozen Deep is such a good book. It's a little novella as well, like The Dream Woman, except this was written during the time the Franklin expedition was lost in the ice. Now, they still had hope that they would come home at that point, and they didn't know what would happen to them. And this was at the point they were sending out rescue missions. And it's essentially about two young men that go on the Franklin expedition, and it's them getting home to their loved ones and one to their fiancé. And it's essentially a story about these two men surviving against the odds, when in reality these men didn't survive the Franklin expeditions. All of them died, and it's heartbreaking reading that now, because when it was published, there was still hope. I mean, it's just heartbreaking. The Return of Sherlock Holmes by Arthur Conan Doyle. Now, I struggle telling the difference between a lot of these Sherlock Holmes ones, so I think I'm just going to do them all in one go, if that makes sense, really, really quickly. Let's see if there's any more. There's quite a lot. I probably should have taken out some of these. Okay, let's go. Fast. We've got The Return of Sherlock Holmes. Solid. Sign of Four. Solid. Study in Scarlet. Solid. Valley of Fear. Very good. Memoirs. Good. Casebook. Good. His Last Bow. Also good. The Sherlock Holmes stories kind of always sit within those two, about here, on the whole, for me. I've listened and read them all numerous times each, and they're always comfort stories for me. They're very, very simple and they're fun, and that's the most important thing when you come to them. So if anybody hasn't read the Sherlock Holmes short stories, they're very, very accessible and easy to read, and probably the easiest Victorian literature that you can probably come across. Pygmalion by George Bernard Shaw. 5 stars. I absolutely love this. This is the actual only play on this list, actually, because I don't tend to read plays. I tend to see if I can try and watch them, so I don't tend to read any of them, but Pygmalion for some reason is the one exception to that. I love My Fair Lady, the musical, so I decided to read more about George Bernard Shaw and Pygmalion. And then when I read what his opinions on the ending and that stuff like that, it's just such an, I don't want to say empowering, but it is such an empowering book, and it is such a fascinating kind of reflection on relationships, and for some reason people going, oh yeah, of course she ends up with him, but why would she? Because he's treated her like shit the whole way through. And that's what George Bernard Shaw wanted to highlight, and that sort of things, and that's why I found it really, really fun. Agnes Gray by Anne Bronte. The next Bronte sisters, going into only the prose and the passion both will be exalted, because kind of similar to Middlemarch by George Eliot, I feel like Anne Bronte's work is very understated. So you've got the kind of sweeping drama of Wuthering Heights, and then you've got Jane Eyre with the running away and that sort of things, whereas Anne Bronte's character is kind of trapped in a situation that she can't really get out of, and she just has to keep going because she can't run away. There isn't someone rich to just fling it off her shoulders and just kind of run away with her. She's a governess, and she's trapped in that position and she can't do anything about it, and it's just essentially her monologue throughout it. And that's what I find really, really fascinating, is that more's a focus on poverty and that sort of thing, which is quite anecdotal for Anne Bronte. I can't wait to read The Tenant in Wildfell Hall at some point, because I feel like that would be really quite good. Okay. The War of the Worlds by H.G. Wells. I think this is my least favourite H.G. Wells book. I enjoyed it well enough, but I felt it was a bit separated. I think the point was to follow one character all the way through, one man, but it just felt so detached from anything. You don't really find out anybody's name, his relation. You know he's got a wife out there, but you don't know where she is, that kind of thing. And it just kind of that hollowness, that emptiness that I think makes it a little bit detached as a novel and makes me not enjoy it as much. The Great Gatsby, it's going next to Dubliners. I don't like F. Fitzgerald as a person, and that bleeds through. I feel like Zelda should have got more credit for this. I'm not the biggest Gatsby fan. The 20s is probably my least favourite period for literature. I don't really enjoy it. That's all I can say about it. Dracula by Bram Stoker. Top tier, my favourite classic of all time. Absolutely brilliant. Sign up to Dracula Daily, and hopefully soon I'm going to be doing a ranking of every single Dracula adaptation and seeing how I get on with that. It's taking a long time to actually watch them all, but Dracula's brilliant. Brilliant. The Age of Innocence by Edith Wharton. This is very similar to Lady Chatterley's Lover. I didn't like the writing style, and I didn't like any of the characters, and it wasn't even in that kind of appreciative didn't like it. I just didn't. They were just all arseholes, and there was just nothing. And you could tell that they were wanting you to root for this guy, but he was being a complete arsehole to both of the women that he was with, and you're like, why would you do that? No, nah, not good. Nope. The Metamorphosis by Frank Kafka. That's going straight up into second to top tier because I listened to this on a train journey down from Fort William to Glasgow, and it was so much fun. I was literally just sat on a broken down train, and I was like, oh great, I'm stuck in the middle of nowhere, got no phone signal, but I had one book downloaded onto my phone, and it was The Metamorphosis, and I was like, okay, might as well get this over with. Absolutely devoured it, loved it, it was so good. It was just had that perfect sort of, it's just written so matter-of-factly compared to what's actually going on. It's fascinating to just read the style of writing to what actually is going on. It's great. Virginia Woolf's Orlando. Tilda Swinton, I'm sorry. Your film was a lot better than this book. I didn't like it. Sorry. The Italian by Ad Radcliffe. Didn't like this one either. This is the one where... Is it the one? Or is it a different one? No, I think it is this one. This is the one where he ends up going with... Oh no, is it the monk? Wait a minute. No. The monk's a different one. The Italian is the one where he ends up being incestuous, isn't it? Oh god, it was just creepy to all. And I was like, I picked up Anne Radcliffe because I was like, oh yeah, it's mentioned in Northanger Abbey, Anne Radcliffe. Find out what it is, and then suddenly there was incest and there was rape and I was just sitting there like, what the fuck? What? So yeah, I didn't enjoy that one at all. Then we had The Hangman's Daughter, which I thought was good. It's another one of those books that I came across when I was trying to find a lot of Gothic literature. And it's a very, very short novella by Ambrose Bierce, and it's essentially just kind of talking about being a social outcast and you can't really help it, and the dangers that come with that, and the kind of stereotypes and something like that. And it's enjoyable. It is translated from German. I'm hoping to find a slightly better translation sometime soon and read it again because I wasn't the biggest fan of this translator that I read, but it was very good. Right, then we've got Horace Walpole's Castle of... I can't remember what it's called, and it's cut off at the bottom. Yes, kind of the same to Hangman's Daughter. This was a gothic novel that I picked out. It was kind of middle of the road. There were some nice bits in there about secret passageways and escaping and that sort of thing. But it is what it is. This Enchanted April by... Oh, I can't remember who it's by. I didn't like it either. It was slightly better than The Age of Innocence and Lady Chatterley's Lover, but it was essentially just a bunch of rich and slightly less rich women sleeping at each other in a house over a holiday. Yeah. The Eternal Husband by Dostoevsky. This is my first book by him, and it really did make me want to read more. It was quite difficult to read, but it is very, very short, so I feel a lot more confident going into something a little bit longer by him in the future. But it was really funny in a dark comedy way. But on the other hand, it was just, on the whole, quite a good book. The Haunted House by Charles Dickens. Now, this is a bunch of short stories from loads of different authors throughout the Victorian era. So, for example, off the top of my head, it was Wilkie Collins, Charles Dickens. I think there was Elizabeth Gaskell in there. Basically, he compounded all these kind of ghost stories, and it was one for each room of the house, and each person got a room, and they had to write a story about that room. And it was a very mixed bag. Quite a lot of the stories I didn't like the way they were written, but quite a lot of them I have loved them. Wilkie Collins and Elizabeth Gaskell's books, short stories especially, I really appreciated and enjoyed. But there's quite a few of them that I wasn't, so that's why I thought it was a bit of a mixed bag. Oh, I forgot Sherlock Holmes' last one. Hound of the Baskervilles goes up here. It was a very good book. H.G. Wells' The Island of Dr Monroe. It's one of these ones that I feel like should go in a half category. Oh well, it's going here. The Island of Dr Monroe is just terrifying. It's less sci-fi and more just straight up body horror, half of it. It's just one sentence after the other of just grotesque descriptions of human experimentation and the dangers of scientific research that are left unbounded. And I think he was really going for something when he said this, but it was written really well in that way. The Last of the Mohicans by James Fenimore Cooper. Nah, this is another one I just didn't enjoy too much. I don't know what else to say about it. The Lasitude of Two Idols. So the problem with having a big fan in Wilkie Collins is that quite a lot of his work was in conjunction with Charles Dickens because they were really, really close friends. Which means if you want to read some of the work by Wilkie Collins, you also have to read some of the work by Charles Dickens. And although the Wilkie Collins bits might be up here, Charles Dickens bit is sometimes down here. I'm just not a big fan of him. But you can really see that they were very, very good friends, and the history behind it was just fascinating. The Legend of Sleepy Hollow by Irving Washington, I believe. Yeah, it was pretty good. Again, kind of like that, short stories, and some of them were good, some of them were missed. I always feel like I rank short story collections in the middle, because quite often they're hit or miss for me, so they end up always being average in that way. The Monk by Matthew Gregory Jones, I think, was very similar to the Italian, where you've got this monk trying to break up these two young things because his mum wants it to. Yeah, I wouldn't recommend it. I only read it because, again, with the Italian, it was those gothic novels. Legends of the Treasure Seekers, same as The Five Children in It. Turn of the Screw. I'm going to very cautiously put it here because no, I'm not. Fuck it. Again, I don't really like Henry James's work, but at least this one has an interesting premise that kind of reverberates through quite a lot of media and that sort of thing. Right, and then we've got The Yellow Paper by Charlotte Perkins. I can't remember her middle name. I've just read this recently and I really, really enjoyed it. It's essentially very, very, very short story about this woman descending into madness and insanity and her struggle with it. And it's really, really interesting to see that development just go from paragraph to paragraph. It's really, really well done. And then we've got We by Yvonne Zamatin. I didn't like this book for the same reason I didn't like 1984. And that I felt it was kind of sexist. And that's all I'm going to say about it. Far from the Madding Crowd. It's going up here. I enjoyed this a lot more than I was expecting to. I really liked the book with the film, with Carey Mulligan, and because of that, I decided to pick up the book. And I started it a couple of times and struggled with it, and then I just kept going and just kept going, and then decided that, yeah, that was quite good actually. Finished it. The Bell Jar by Sylvia Plath. This was also a recent read, and The Bell Jar is going up here. It was very, very good, and for some reason it just kind of caught me in a way that I wasn't expecting it to. A lot of people talk quite a lot about this book and how good it is, and of course when people do that, I try and not get caught up in the hype of it because I don't want to be disappointed. But I thoroughly enjoyed this book, and it was fascinating. That's why I think quite a lot of people say it's like Catcher in the Rye but for women, and I'm like, I've never read Catcher in the Rye, but I don't think it's this unhinged. Pride and Prejudice. A classic Austen. Very good. Phantom of the Opera. Much better than the stage musical. Andrew Lloyd Webber, what are you doing? You are not... The Phantom of the Opera is... The Phantom himself, Eric, is an evil son of a bitch. Evil, evil, evil. And the fact that Andrew Lloyd Webber says he sees himself in it concerns me. Sense and Sensibility. I'm going to put it down here. That's not because I don't like Sense and Sensibility, but rather it's my least favourite of the ones that I've read so far. And I've only got Mansfield Park left to go in terms of Austen, but I've been kind of putting that off because I don't like any of the adaptations I've ever seen, so I don't really know if I like the story of it all that much. So yeah, goodness me, this video's long, much longer than I was expecting it to. I hope you enjoyed. This is my final ranking here. I'm going to leave the tier ranker in the description below. Let me know what you think, or what your favourites are, and let me know if you disagree with any of my decisions. Well, thank you very much, and I'll see you next week. Bye bye.